Welcome back to TechShare Pro 2021. I'm Mark Walker from AbilityNet. And welcome to the first keynote today on Wednesday. We're going to be looking at policy, government policy, and also practice within organizations, talking about disability confident and the impact that can have within the workplace. And then we're also going to be looking at a project that AbilityNet's been involved in, funded through the DCMS government funding in the UK, to bring tech support to people with learning disabilities, enabling them to close that digital divide. So 3 really great sessions, and we're really looking forward to going through those with you. I'm going to also just say thank you to the sponsors. If I can have the slides up. Thank you. So we've got, the reason I need the slide is because we've got so many I need to thank, just to be clear. So AbilityNet, obviously we're organising that. Microsoft is our key partner. We've had so much support from them. If you were on the call a moment ago, you heard from Nina in Finland talking about their work on accessibility. And we've really leaned heavily on that and worked closely with them to build the programme this year. We've also had huge support from Barclays, Google, Intuit, Meta and Sony. And there's plenty of other people contributing, including Attendable, Business Disability Forum, Code Mantra, DAT Europe, Digit Music, IAAP, IT Pro, RNIB, Text Help, the United Kingdom Association for Accessible Formats, and the Valuable 500. You hopefully saw Caroline Casey kicking us off yesterday morning, talking about the Valuable 500, and also saw this session in the keynote at the end of the day, looking at the program they're developing through the Valuable 500 with Verizon and Yahoo and Google to build accessibility knowledge and skills. So, fantastic kickoff yesterday. We're going to shift gear today into maybe getting a little bit closer to the chalk face. I've got my colleague Adam with me here. Adam, could you just introduce yourself and explain the work you do with AbilityNet?
Yeah, hi, I'm Adam Tweed. I'm the innovation consultant at AbilityNet. And basically, a lot of the stuff that we're doing is around workplace at the moment. We do a lot of things like gap analysis. We're doing e-learning, these sorts of things. My job is essentially looking at the technology that's available, the technology that's out there to support people, and how we can kind of employ that in the work that we do, and how we can kind of educate people about the work, about how kind of transformative that sort of technology can be for people in the workplace and education.
Cool, and I think that really brings in the second element of AbilityNet's work. A lot of work we're doing is looking at web accessibility and apps, but equally broadly under that banner of assistive technology and the ways that technologies can enable people, particularly in the workplace, in your setting. We also about education and in the home. Yeah. That's a very broad spectrum that we cover, and you can really sense that across TechShare Pro, I think, can you? All the different sessions, all the different little nuggets. There's a little bit of AbilityNet bits in there somewhere, isn't there? And yeah. Today's a good example of that. So we're going to kick off with a session with somebody from Alejandro from the European Disability Forum and Clive Gilbert from PolicyConnect, who also produces AbilityNet's dispatches email. They're going to be talking about policy. There's a new UK government disability strategy. There's also a new EU disability strategy. They're going to introduce that to you and explain a little bit about that framework, and so you can understand the context of that policy that's changing around us at the moment. Over to you guys.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Alejandro Moledo, and I work as head of policy in the European Disability Forum, which is the umbrella organization representing persons with disabilities before the European Union institutions. I'm here today with Clive Gilbert, and we are going to discuss the different disability strategies that have been adopted at EU level and also in the UK. So I will start by presenting you the European Disability Rights Strategy, which was adopted in March 2021, some months ago. And this happened after a good conversation and a good involvement of the disability movement, the European disability movement with the Commission in the preparation of this strategy. The previous one ended in 2020, so it was about time that the Commission will present a renewed commitment for the rights of persons with disabilities. Our assessment of the new strategy is fairly positive. We believe that this is it goes beyond the previous one and is very much rooted in the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, this human rights convention that has been ratified not only by all member states of the European Union, but also by the European Union itself. The strategy reinforces the presence of persons with disabilities and the representative organizations in the mechanisms, in the existing mechanisms at European level. And it does include a set of, it's divided in 8 chapters. Each chapter has a set of actions, and some of them are tagged as flagship initiatives, and I will mention some of them. Good thing is that this time the strategy includes a set of dates when the action will take place, and it includes also the possibility in 2024 to renew and to review some of these actions in case they are not fulfilled. So we find this strategy with we believe it has potential, but obviously, as in any strategy, it very much depends on the political will and the political ambition of our institutions and our policymakers. So that's why it's positive, and it gives us all a roadmap, but we will need to be very vigilant and active, and it will again very much depend on the resources put in place and the political ambition of the EU institutions. The positive sides of the strategy is that it is a broad strategy. As I mentioned, 8 chapters. I will touch upon some of them, and they cover many of the proposals that we from the civil society organization we were putting forward during the discussions with the Commission last year. One of the main flagship initiatives relates to the creation of a European disability card. This has been actually a pilot project implemented it in 8 countries, in which by which you can travel to these countries without presenting your national disability assessment, and in a way this will facilitate the free movement of persons with disabilities across the EU. One of the main values of the European Union is the free movement of people, and unfortunately for persons with disabilities this has been very difficult. So with this card, which will be presented in 2023, we hope that the countries will adopt with a strong legal basis a way to mutually recognize disability in the whole of the EU. So when you travel to another country, you can access the accessible entrance, or the assistance, or the discounts, or the benefits and the rights that locals with disabilities will have in that specific country. Then the strategy is also very much focused on the institutionalization, on supporting independent living in the community. The Commission will present a set of guidelines for the institutionalization, so there is a coherence in how this transition is understood by all member states, by all countries. Then obviously employment is an important objective as well of this strategy, as unfortunately the employment rate of persons with disabilities is 25% lower than those without the disability, and the Commission will present a package for underpinning the inclusion in the open labor market of persons with disabilities, and then a set of proposals for accessibility, which is actually the first chapter of the strategy. One of the other flagship initiatives is the creation of a resource center, a knowledge center, known as Accessible EU. Basically, this is the response of a proposal that we put forward to create a new European Agency for Accessibility, because in the past years the EU has adopted many legislation on accessibility: the European Accessibility Act, the directive on web accessibility, on audiovisual media services, on electronic communications. So there is a need for gather all the knowledge on accessibility and exchange the best practices across countries and experts on how to implement these policies in practice, which is in the end what we all expect. Also on accessibility, the Commission has published, because it was actually one of the actions for this year, a set of best examples on how to apply accessibility in public procurement. This was already in the legislation for many years, but we haven't seen yet public procurers taking up this possibility, right? To when you procure a new infrastructure, a new ICT product or service, or a new product that is going to be used by the public sector, it's important that they incorporate accessibility in the technical specifications of these procurement contracts. So the Commission has, as I said, recently launched a new guide on how to incorporate the social aspects in public procurement, in which accessibility is one of them. Accessibility is also included in other aspects of the strategy concerning education, obviously, supporting inclusive education. So in a way to increase the skills of teachers and professors on diversity and persons with disabilities, and make education more accessible to students with disabilities. This is also applied in access to justice, in which is not only to make justice more inclusive to persons with disabilities when we use them, but also to ensure that the justice system works in an accessible manner, so persons with disabilities can work as well in the justice system as public servants, for example. So there is also a set of proposals which are very good, actually, in the, let's say, in the obligations of the EU institutions as a public administration. There is the commitment to renew the human resources policy, to increase diversity among the European officials, and also to ensure that the EU itself, so the EU institutions, comply with the accessibility legislation and standard that we've been adopting in the past years. So not only websites and ICT, for which the strategy foresees the publication of an action plan to be released this year on the accessibility of their websites and digital communication, but also the built environment as well. So all the European institutions buildings, some of them are pretty old, and therefore they need to verify that they comply with the latest accessibility standards. The way also in which this strategy will be governed is by setting up a new forum, let's say a new group called the Disability Platform. They just released, the Commission just released the call for experts. We, EDF, we want to apply to be members of this platform, in which there will be not only the CRPD focal point at European level, which is the European Commission, but also those CRPD focal points at national level, because it will be very important that the EU and the member states coordinate their disability strategies in a way that they are complementary to each other. So these are some of the positive sides and the positive aspects of the strategy. Again, it is very positive that in 2024 we will be able to review what has been achieved and what still needs to be done, and revise some of the actions that may have not been fulfilled. But the strategy, also the European strategy, also has some flaws. Let's say one of them is the lack of teeth, because there are not many legislative proposals included in this legislation. The Commission is proposing many initiatives on issuing recommendations and evaluations of current legislation, but not many new legislative proposals. We believe that, for example, the disability card that I mentioned before will need a strong legal basis, but also other aspects that are included in the strategy, such as the evaluation of the assistive technology market, because in the strategy, the Commission says that by 2023, they will review how the internal market works for assistive technology. And we know that for persons with disabilities, sometimes it's very difficult to access the most suitable piece of assistive technology for you, because maybe this is available in another EU country, and because of the different certification schemes, you cannot access them or you cannot get refund for that specific piece of assistive technology. So it's important to verify that the internal market also works for assistive technologies. Again, there are many of the proposals which we already knew they were going to happen. These evaluations of existing legislation, such as the Web Accessibility Directive that I mentioned before, that evaluation which we knew it was going to happen this year and just finished last week, actually. And we hope that this strategy will actually have an impact, and therefore we missed the resources, the necessary resources to implement them. So again, the political will is very important, and the resources to actually make these actions a reality are fundamental for the success of this strategy, and I believe for all strategies. Another important aspect that was missed, in our opinion, is that it does not create a stronger focal point for the implementation of the convention. We believe that in order to implement any strategy, you need to have a clear leadership. And at the moment, the Commission focal point is in the DG Employment, in the Directorate General for Employment and Social Affairs. But as we know, disability is a cross-cutting issue that should be mainstreamed in all the DGs of the Commission. We also thought that there should have been a stronger focus on women and girls with disabilities, and one of the calls of the strategy, because sometimes because of the difference in competence between the EU and member states, there are many calls for member states to act, and therefore one of them missing pieces of legislation at European level is an anti-discrimination legislation that we are still waiting for it, because it's been blocked in the Council, which is the representation of member states. So without this political will, again, from the national level, some of the objectives of the strategy will not be met. So just to conclude, again, this is a very promising strategy, but in order to make a change in people's life, and particularly after the great pushback of on the rights of persons with disabilities due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we believe that the EU institutions will need to work with us, so to work closely with persons with disabilities and the representative organizations, and to really invest the resources and the political will to achieve all the objectives of this strategy. I believe that many of these challenges will be shared as well, but by the UK disability strategy. But I would like to pass the floor to Clive to give us an overview on that as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to talk briefly about the UK's National Disability Strategy in general, then focus on specific proposals to help disabled people use technology in the workplace, which is something that PolicyConnect and the APPG for Assistive Technology have been exploring together. The strategy was launched in July this year after a consultation with organisations. For access to technology, the headline has been a pledge to form a national centre for accessible and assistive technology. The government is looking into how it can implement it over the next year. The strategy also covers a range of issues such as accessible housing and education. I also want to tell you about how the strategy proposes to help people who use assistive technology in the workplace. There is a pledge for a new passport system for the Access to Work programme, which is the main scheme that supports disabled people into work. The new passport will help people explain their needs to new employers when they are first onboarding into the workplace, as well as helping them to transfer their assistive technology from one workplace to another. Currently, it's quite hard to take your technology with you, and this will make it a lot easier. It will also help join up access to work with the Disabled Students Allowance for disabled university students. It will make their path into a job a lot easier, especially if the person has got a range of requirements. Finally, the government will set up a new online hub to provide advice on all sorts of issues, including employment rights for disabled people. We see quite a few points in the strategy around assistive technology. It's not perfect. At PolicyConnect, we have been looking at how difficult it can be for assistive technology users to transition from education system or a period of unemployment to the workforce. We recently launched a report that recommended creating a disability champion to help create a more comprehensive framework to help people move from education system into a job and a career. At the moment, when students finish at university or college, there is little support until you get a job, at which point you can apply for access to work. Another problem is that not many people know it exists. Self-employed disabled people and small businesses find it especially difficult to engage with, which is stressed in the strategy. In summary, the strategy is a positive step forward, particularly with the new Centre for Assistive Technology, but we want to see the government follow through on their commitments and make them stronger in some places. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much, Clive, for this overview. I find many common problems and flaws in what you explained in the UK disability strategy and how we see the situation in access to employment and access to assistive technologies and accessibility in many European countries. So it's very important that we share this information and we exchange best practices. The most important in the end is that persons with disabilities, we have access to the available and affordable and accessible technologies we need. So thank you very much for that. We will leave it here and happy to be in touch with any of the participants if there is any question. Thank you very much, Clive, and thank you all.
Thank you so much, Alejandro, and thank you, Clive. It can feel sometimes like that policy stuff is too dense and too deep to work through. But what it does is it creates a framework for all of the stuff that we do, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in sort of personal rights for individuals. And I think that obviously the shift in terms of Brexit means that there is a gap between what the UK and what the EU is doing, but there's huge crossover as well in a lot of those conversations there. And there's lots of work going on in organisations, including AbilityNet and many others, engaging with UK government and the European government. There's work through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. They have an EU chapter, and there's a lot of work they're doing to connect into the EU policy stuff, and Alejandro is a connection that we've had for many years through TechShare Pro. So I think it's important for any of the organisations and connections that you're making with people to recognise that framework. Both policies are open to being interpreted and implemented. This is the time to get in and see if there's anything we can do to affect the way that that's done. There's lots of conversations about specialist centres. And I think for us, in terms of work we've been talking about, a way to look in on that lens is to look at employment. And certainly, we know that a lot of disabled people are not in work, can't get into work, can't stay in work. I think that's a huge gap that both of those policies need to address, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think what was really interesting about the piece, certainly that Clive was saying, is the link up between something like the DSAs and with access to work, because that's the real cliff for a lot of people.
And just to clarify, disabled
students' allowances. So there was very much, it's that transition period where you've been supported throughout university and then suddenly there is a cliff and you're expected to kind of move into work and hit the ground running on day one, but you've had all the support that you've had previously and that you've got used to removed. And there's often quite a lengthy kind of application process through access to work to get that support back in place again. So there are two elements of that. Firstly, it's fantastic that they're actually thinking about linking things up. The second thing, again, to return to the kind of inbuilt tools, is educating people on the sorts of support that they can expect as they sit down fresh at a desk, wherever they go. So I know when I log on to a Windows machine, I can adjust this, I can get to immersive reader, I can, if I'm on an Apple machine, then there's VoiceOver that I can access, and just having enough support to just get through that first period until other things can start kicking in.
All your breath on the first day in the job, essentially,
Exactly.
isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the starting
Yeah.
point. Great. So changing direction slightly, but connecting in that practical help, I think, is some work that AbilityNet's been involved in with a number of other partners, looking at supporting individuals with learning disabilities and providing them with access to tech support. It's much more than this, the next session, but it's looking at that type of support that people need. I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Amy, who's going to be in discussion with some of the partners we're involved in. So over to you, Amy.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be joined today by Priya Ramdas from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, Robert Mclaren from PolicyConnect, and Emma Stone from the Good Things Foundation. And we're going to be talking about the Digital Lifeline project. This was a collaborative emergency response project that took place earlier this year. It was funded by DCMS, and it was looking to alleviate the disproportionate negative effect of the pandemic on people living with a learning disability. Now, of course, I'm sure we all saw a lot of hard-hitting and quite upsetting stories in the media about the impacts of COVID on people with a learning disability. And these were undoubtedly quite complex and broad and far-reaching. But when we don't zone in on the digital side of things, with so many day-to-day activities moving online during the pandemic, there was a specific impact on people who didn't have access to a digital device or data, or maybe lacked digital skills. And statistics show that disabled people, that there was a 2020 figures from the ONS that said that disabled people were much more likely to be digitally excluded than non-disabled people. I think it was an estimated 15% of disabled people having never been online, when you compare that with 3% amongst non-disabled people. And then bearing in mind in the pandemic that many people in the high risk group of people living with a learning disability might have been shielding, it meant that they were really cut off from family, keeping up with regular activities, work, study, and also from important services like healthcare and online shopping. So it was clear this was an important area for action. So Priya, I wonder if you could kick us off by saying how the project came about.
So Amy, thanks very much. So as you mentioned just now, I think it became clear sort of through the summer, autumn last year that disabled people had been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And so we started to have, so within DCMS, we started to have discussions with the Disability Unit and Cabinet Office. And it was really part of a much broader discussion about the impact of the pandemic on disabled people, but about what we could do to support, from the digital side. I think the challenge really was that we were looking at an emergency response, and I think, digital needs are something that are really quite a, long-term ongoing issue. And we were also conscious that we'd need to do something that would be very quick, easy to get off the ground, and we, and dealt with the immediate impact of the pandemic. Recognizing that there are these longer term issues. I think in discussion with the Disability Unit and various other people in the NHS and DHSC colleagues, I think we also sort of realised that I think people with learning disabilities were in a particularly difficult position, and I think this was sort of twofold. Partly the health impact of the pandemic itself, but also I think there was some research, and I wish there was more, but some research kind of suggesting that actually this was a group that really benefited or had the potential to benefit from being online, but was not. And so I think in discussion with yourselves, amongst others, we started to put together a proposal, kind of quite a simple proposal in terms of concept of sort of identifying adults with learning disabilities that, you know, face barriers getting online, and providing them with the devices, data, and sort of digital support that they'd need to be able to get online.
Fantastic, thanks, Priya. And yeah, it certainly was an emergency response for many reasons, wasn't it? Yeah, absolutely. So Robert, just going over to you from a PolicyConnect perspective, what was your involvement in the project and what were you hoping it would achieve?
Thanks very much, Amy. So some people will know PolicyConnect works on assistive and accessible technology as one of its main policy areas, and that's my interest. Priya talked about engaging with the Disability Unit at the Cabinet Office around this project. And of course, during 2020, the Disability Unit was leading on the development of the National Strategy for Disabled People. And at that time, I was engaging with officials there, to working with them on how we could reach out to stakeholders to develop and design technology policies for the national strategy. And so, I think, Priya and I had spoken about that, the sort of longer term strategic part, which I think was a good entry point into this kind of more rapid response initiative. I think from early on in our conversations, one of the things that I know Priya and I talked about is setting up a advisory group for the project that would bring together kind of full diversity of the digital inclusion and disability advocacy sector, and that we would look to set that up sort of really early on, if you like, almost before we were sort of had everything kind of ready and looked really neat. We were sort of, I think there was a great kind of willingness to sort of bring people on and say, we're hitting the ground running, would you join us? And I think we'll get onto it, but I think it was one of the strengths of the project, that advisory group was both able to kind of, be a real source of insight and innovation and challenge for steering the project, but also I think has potentially kind of got some legs in longer term. And crucially, that was a group that involved disabled people's organizations and people who have lived experience of learning disabilities themselves.
I think that diversity of input was really, really important, particularly given the pace of the project, to make sure that we have many, many heads thinking about all the potential issues and consequences. So yeah, absolutely. So over to you, Emma. Good Things Foundation had the scary job of being the lead organisation in the project, and people have said already that it was a highly collaborative project, and it really was a range of organisations, large and small, of all different types. And how did you make it happen from an organisational perspective?
Thanks, Amy. So like you said, this was a team effort, just saying that from the start. And there is no way that Digital Lifeline would have been as successful if it hadn't been massively collaborative. But I'll just roll back and kind of give a bit more of that journey. So I suppose Good Things Foundation, we're a digital inclusion charity. And therefore, what we were able to bring into the conversation with yourselves, with DCMS, PolicyConnect and others, was that we already had the experience that we'd built up during the pandemic of getting devices with data out to digitally excluded people through community organisations that knew them, that could say, we know the people who really need this support, and we can reach them and we can support them to then use this. And so that was something that prior to the pandemic, Good Things had never done before. But as soon as the pandemic started, that was just a massive issue for people in terms of not having that personal access to a suitable device, not being able to afford to get online. And that was fantastic to have that experience. But what we knew with Digital Lifeline was that if we're thinking about people with learning disabilities, we know many of them will also have additional support needs in terms of how do you make a device really suitable for yourself in terms of the accessibility settings. There might be additional assistive technology support needs as well, because people may have additional impairments, visual impairments, dexterity impairments. And that was expertise that AbilityNet absolutely has in spades, that Good Things Foundation doesn't. So that was the kind of a start of a great collaboration there as well. And whilst Good Things Foundation supports and runs a national network with a lot of community organisations, including some that are self-advocacy groups and have reach to people with learning disabilities, what we had with the DCMS funding was an opportunity to distribute devices to 5,000 people with learning disabilities, but that had to be done across England and within a very, very short time period. And so that's where other collaborators came on board through the advisory group. So Learning Disability England, voluntary organisations, disability group, organisations that could really help to work with us, with AbilityNet, to promote this, to be able to make sure that we were partnering with local community organisations, specialist providers who had that reach. And I think that's really important because what we already knew from our past experience was that you need to work with people who have those trusted relationships and can reach those who are most in need, both to be able to make sure that this is reaching the right people. This is kind of, supported, funded by government. It's really important, it has to reach the right people. But also, even though this is short term, to be able to increase the opportunity for sustaining the impact beyond that, because otherwise there could be a risk that a device might just end up not being used and in a cupboard, and that's absolutely not what we wanted to happen. And so it was really through then collaboration, getting the messages out, using our different social networks to reach different community-based and other specialist organisations and adult colleges across the country, so that they could apply. They could say, actually, we know we can distribute this number of devices to these people because they absolutely fit the eligibility criteria. And so our job then across AbilityNet and Good Things and others was to enable them to do that, to do the procurement, to provide them with the access to additional help and training and support so they could do that. And brilliantly, we managed to do it. So there were in total 150 partner organisations, some really big, some really small, and together we got 5,500 devices out to digitally excluded people with learning difficulties.
Fantastic, and it's a real achievement for everyone. So yeah, really, and it was brilliant being involved as the lead accessibility partner, just sort of providing that wraparound support where we could help with tech questions. We offered assessments to individuals to identify those adjustments that you were talking about, and having access to be able to procure additional pieces of equipment. One of the things that really stood out that our team said was, that there was a wide range of knowledge about accessibility across the organisations, but lots of organisations were really surprised by how independently people were going to be able to use the tablets just through a few adaptations or the addition of certain pieces of hardware. Meant that they were able to independently socialise online, access music, games, educational apps, and so many other things. So yeah, it was really fantastic. And I think a lot of the community partners have also said the learnings from the project that they can take forward to support additional people in the future has been really significant. So there's definitely lots of legacy learnings, isn't there? Yeah. And talking about that, Emma, obviously it's fairly recent, isn't it? But what were the initial outcomes and findings, and what next perhaps?
Yeah, so So what we've already shared is we produced an interim report which sets out some of the immediate impact and the lessons that we learned through those first months, and so that's available on our website, and AbilityNet website, which you'll be able to share the link to that. And what that shows is that even within this short period of time, over 90% of people who were receiving devices were saying that they had already experienced a positive benefit in their lives in some way. And over half of people were saying that they'd learned to do something new to build their digital skills and confidence. And with people also, like you were saying, Amy, talking about being able to be connected, being able to have fun again. A lot of people wanted a device to make living through a pandemic more enjoyable, so it's for fun and for interests and hobbies, as well as for being able to stay in touch. Zoom is a really great example of people for whom actually their device was they may have had a device before and it was too small and they weren't able to participate properly in Zoom groups, meeting with maybe other self-advocates or people in their friendship network. So loads of examples of that where people were saying, wow, I haven't been able to do this in so long, and that's just fantastic. And a piece sorry, no, I could you interrupt for forever. I think one of the insights report also does talk about some of the lessons we learned, and one of the things we know is that as Priya said, this was emergency. It was a short time scale, so there were different ways in which we tried to build in the possibility for longer term support. So Digital Unite was another partner, and they were providing kind of access to anyone who is a Digital Lifeline partner to be able to use some online digital champions training courses. And that was responding to the fact that across those 150 partners, some were really experienced already in supporting people to get online and to build their digital skills and confidence, but that wasn't the case for a lot of organisations. And in fact, there was quite a big finding around especially the need for more capacity building in social care and community care sector, around people building their own digital skills and confidence, so also they could then support other people to learn how to use devices and get online as well. And there were some challenges as well around data. So we were able to provide additional top-up data, but we know that there is a bigger challenge out there that is beyond what any emergency program can deliver in terms of how people can access and pay for enough data to meet their needs if they are living on low incomes. So we were able to do some things, other things were beyond what the timescale and what this program could do. But I think for me, one of the biggest takeaways is not only just the power of the cross-sector collaboration, but also the real difference that having a device and having data and having someone to kind of help you to use it if that's what you need, the real and immediate difference that can make to people's quality of life. And then, as you say, if you bring in around the additional assistive tech and the being able to kind of tailor and customize your device, there were examples of people talking about, actually, if I hadn't known about that, I would have given up on this. And being able to know about, this kind of free app or this small piece of kit absolutely unlocked the world of being able to use digital, which people hadn't experienced before. So it is just that sense of we can really, really make a difference. It is really worth doing this.
Brilliant. I completely agree with all of those points, Emma, and we'll come back to you actually in a moment to talk about what might be coming next in your sort of journey with these things. So Priya, just back to you. What was your take on the project and the learnings?
I think many of my sort of reflections are very similar to Emma's. I think I was, I knew that there was a need. I mean, I think that was fairly obvious from, from all the statistics data that we've been seeing for years. But I think what came out was the level of demand for these devices. I mean, I wasn't sure at the beginning of the project whether, given the timescales that we were working to, we'd be able to identify enough people who met the criteria, and there are organizations that could support them. But actually, I think we were really, there was a huge level of demand, and I think that's indicative of how important internet access is for people and how much they want it. And it was interesting to see as well that the beneficiaries were pretty evenly distributed across all age categories, and there are a lot of younger people, a lot of people in their sort of 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. So there really is a sort of wide-ranging need. Again, I think sort of echoing what Emma said. So normally when within government we're setting up a fund, we'd sort of spend some time before the fund sort of scoping out, looking at the evidence, scoping out various options, talking to all the stakeholders. I think in this case, there was very little time to do any of that. And I think having that stakeholder group, including people with lived experience, including people who had a variety of sort of experience across, working directly with people with learning disabilities and also working on digital exclusion, made a huge difference, because it meant that we could address each kind of policy question and design question as it came up. So, for example, I think the role of the advisory group in for example, and looking at issues around safeguarding was really important, because I think there's an automatic assumption that that perhaps people with learning disabilities need to be protected more than perhaps is that I think there's a balance between protection and being given the ability to do things, and I think the role of the advisory group in sort of helping us to set the balance, the right place was incredibly important. And I mean, I think in terms of learning, it's been interesting to me to see how bringing this group of people together has really resulted, I think, in a lot of sharing of information, but also I hope collaborative working on a range of other projects as well. And I think, as Emma mentioned again, I'm sorry, Emma, I'm quoting you a lot. I think being able to see the impact of a project like this, I think, helps to reinforce kind of some of the messages around the importance of digital, the value of providing this sort of wraparound support, as well as data and devices, and how you can go about doing it in a way that's effective, that works for the individual.
Brilliant, thank you, Priya. And I'm seeing we might be running a bit short on time, but I'd love to just quickly go back to Robert and say, given you mentioned the National Disability Strategy earlier, and obviously this is an emergency response, but that has been drawn from a much longer term discussion. What's your view on the wider picture for disabled people that don't have access to devices, data or digital skills? And what do you think would make the biggest difference, linking that into the objectives in the government strategy document?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the National Disability Strategy, it articulates really big ambitions for accessibility in tech. Talks about helping make the UK the most accessible place in the world to live and work with technology. And one of the key commitments toward that aim is to scope the case for creating a national and world-leading centre for assistive and accessible technology. So clearly that, I think, is a process that ought to learn from the success of Digital Lifeline. In particular, when we think about what a national centre do, I think the success of Digital Lifeline, I think, compels one to think about that the national centre should sort of have its feet on the ground, if you like, and not not become too sort of academic and interested in standards and so on, as important as that is. But what can it do to really kind of engage with services and organisations that are already doing this work to help deliver digital inclusion for people? And then briefly as well, I think there's just a lot of kind of lessons at the kind of level of principle that I think is going to be, I'm certainly going to be keen to sort of keep repeating in policymaking context. So I think one is actually just how digital inclusion was conceived within the project. So it might seem a bit kind of conceptual or wonky, but I think we came to a view that we should think about it in terms of what a person can do, not what device they have. So for one person, a smartphone might be enough for them, and they can do what they need to do, and that is digital inclusion. And for another person, it's not, it's a tablet. And for another person, still, there's things around the tablet or even a much more complicated setup. So I think that is really important, and I think it's a consequence of bringing disability and accessibility into the discussions about digital inclusion and digital poverty, which, absent that kind of reckoning with disability, can sometimes be a bit kind of perhaps kind of mechanistic. Are you connected to the internet? Do you have this type of a device that can access the internet, and so on? And then I think finally, just the fact that this was a program that worked to bring opportunities for digital inclusion to an individual, to be used how they like, whether it's to look for work or entertainment or socialization. So much of existing programs around assistive and accessible technology understandably try to remove barriers within a particular context. So it might be in school or in the workplace and so on. But I think the principle of national disability strategy is to try to link up provision across different sort of ages and stages of life and contexts. And this is, I think, an example of where that's helpful. Nobody really separates out that much, how they use technology to talk to friends as opposed to, a job interview. And so we shouldn't expect that to be the case in relation to digital inclusion.
That's really good point. Definitely, it's a holistic thing, isn't it? Digital, it doesn't just sit in silos. Well, we definitely do need to wrap up now. I could talk about this for another half an hour, but I think, in conclusion, the impact for individuals, the networking and the impact for organisations, and the ongoing learnings that we can apply to take this whole thing forward. The project has been incredibly beneficial, and it's just been wonderful working with all of you on it. So watch this space, and we'll keep everybody updated on ongoing activities and what's coming next. Thank you very, very much, Robert, Emma and Priya, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Amy.
What a great discussion that was, wasn't it? I mean, what a brilliant project as well. I mean, we both know from inside with AbilityNet that partnership working was so dynamic. I mean, Priya mentioned, we don't normally do it this way, but so much of it was being done on the hoof, and so much good practice came to the surface, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. We put a lot of resource into it. There were some people on the project working incredibly hard, but it was one of those projects that you saw the outcome almost immediately. It's, so often the sort of things that we do, we know are having an impact, but you don't get that kind of visibility. You don't get that kind of transformative kind of appeal from it, and that real kind of feel.
Well, I know in your work you're often advising people one-to-one. Something I heard in there as well is that people hadn't expected, others in the sort of connections and the networks hadn't expected people to do so much so quickly. Yeah. And I'm guessing you see that every day when you're sat in front of somebody. They're going, wow, I can do this now. Yeah. That's also that transformative moment, working backwards. That's how you get to it, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And the project being a prime example of that, and having our assessors talking to individuals who had been given a tablet, and that's a fantastic kind of transformative thing for them, that they're now online, they can now get to things. But then there's a new barrier, And that's the next thing. You know, you can give somebody a tablet, but that doesn't necessarily mean, as they said in the recording there, that quite often these will get put in a cupboard if they're not if they're not engaged with. And that was our job, is to say, right, well, you can adjust it this way, and you can do this, and have you thought about this? And
well, I remember sitting here a year ago talking to Good Things Foundation about the work they were doing, and they're in there, the DCMS. Clearly, they had to adapt their working practices. And then I think the connection into Robert is, even this morning, I think there's a session going on looking at the development of the strategy, and I know this is informing that partnership working and the ways that we work. And what I would also say is we're running a session later today, an open networking session. Certainly we sit in the middle of a whole string of different relationships when we're trying to support an individual. If you're handing out devices of any type, you can't just hand them over to them. I mean, that's the simplest thing. That's been known for a long time. I think we've modelled what you do. If you're handing out devices, or you're involved in an organisation that wants to share devices with people, how are you going to reach them? What needs are they going to have? How are you going to support them once it's been handed over? Often those are the questions that projects don't answer very well. And I think this one did brilliantly, and the results show that. So if you're around later on, come and join the session. AbilityNet's hosting at 6:30 on the conference platform. You can hear some of the people who are on the call there, ask them questions. But also, if you're in an organisation thinking about sharing devices in any way, out to anybody, you could hear that it wasn't just older people, wasn't just young people. Happened to be particularly trying to focus on people with learning disabilities, but it could be anybody that you're trying to share that digital access to. There's going to be support needs, and that's the bit that we're really trying to emphasise there, and how much help that you can offer that will actually transform the use of that device. I guess that brings us back to the workplace, though, because, of course, the same thing happens in the workplace. You sit down on that first day at work. You don't really know what you're meant to be doing in your job anyway, because you just, everything's strange, and the device in front of you may not be the one you're familiar with. And I think that's equally true in the workplace, isn't it? Just trying to join the dots from... It's not always the IT team that's going to be the people who know the answer. And it's not necessarily a line manager. It's not necessarily your colleague. So I think that's the bit really about the workplace, a very similar mix of partnership and connections that people are going to need.
Absolutely, I mean, workplace, as I said earlier, it's this transition that you are given support up to a point, and as you say, you're sat down at a desk day one. We've all been there. We've all been given pages and pages of policies to read and that sort of thing, and it's that panic. If I've relied on something like text-to-speech, how do I get at that now? How can I absorb all this information? How can I? And then it starts that, the imposter syndrome. Should I be here? Is this place right for me? And it can destroy what could be a really positive experience for somebody. And onboarding is so crucial. It's so important to get that right. You can get valuable employees. Particularly, I feel that in kind of the disabled community, it's a community that is hit particularly hard by this. That kind of, I've got into a workplace, I've got a job, I'm sitting down, and now there's been another barrier put in front of me, and you know what, I don't want this.
Well, and I think, from the employer's point of view, one of the big bonuses, of course, is just thinking about productivity, and we talk about that a lot in the work that we do with employees, because people want to be productive, but equally your employer wants you to be productive, and I think that's the common ground. One area that, certainly we engage in is disability confident, which is a broader movement, and I'm pleased to say what we've got in the next session is some businesses that have committed to disability confident, and we also have Amanda Wadsworth from the Department for Work and Pensions, who leads that programme and is going to be running this next session. So over to you, Amanda, for what I hope is a fantastic conversation about these changes that we're trying to bring into the workplace.
Hi, thanks very much, Mark. That sounds like a really interesting session that you've just been having. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Amanda Wadsworth, and I work for DWP on disability and work opportunities, and I'm delighted to be with you and joining the TechShare Pro Conference today. I have the very great pleasure to talk a little about Disability Confident and the scheme itself, and to invite a number of our Disability Confident Business Leaders Group members to talk about their experience of the scheme. Before I introduce our panel members, I thought it would be really helpful to provide some background information about Disability Confident itself. So the Disability Confident Scheme was launched in November 2016, and it replaced the disability symbol to tick scheme. Disability Confident was developed in collaboration with disabled people, disability organisations and employers, and is considered to be what we describe as a learning journey. And it's very much based on the social model of disability. The scheme supports the government's commitment to having 1 million more disabled people in work by 2027, and it aims to provide employers with the knowledge, skills, and probably more importantly, free resources that they require to attract, recruit, retain, and also progress disabled people in work. All employers start at level 1 in the scheme and progress through the scheme very much at their own pace, with accreditation lasting for 3 years for each level. Moving on to the structure of the scheme, as you can probably see there, level 1, disability confident committed, is the very start of that journey. Level 2 is disability confident employer, and that's the self-assessment process within the scheme. And then moving on to level 3, disability confident leader, and we're going to be talking in a moment to some of our leaders. But I'm presenting a lunch and learn session later on today, so would really strongly encourage people to join that session if possible. So moving on to our desired outcomes of the scheme, I'm not going to read everything that's on the slide, but certainly I want to highlight some of those things. So first of all, cultural change. We really want to help employers to develop inclusive attitudes and working practices. And we also want them to improve their confidence of their disabled employees, so that they feel safe to share and disclose their disabilities and health conditions, so that they can receive the support they need in the workplace to really thrive and prosper. We want to basically increase awareness of things like workplace adjustments, and we want to make sure that employers begin to have very open and transparent conversations where that's possible. The scheme also encourages employers to attract, recruit and retain disabled people, often very high quality applicants that have lots and lots to offer employers. And we want to also increase disability awareness as well, and disability employment particularly, helping to reduce the disability employment gap. So that's a little bit about the scheme at this moment in time, but now it's my real pleasure to introduce you to our panel members. So first of all, we have Holly Addison from Korn Ferry, and she is the Senior Client Partner in the Global Technology Practice and HR Centre of Expertise and Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Lead for Executive Search. Then we have Shanna Wendt, Vice President Communications at Coca-Cola Europacific Partners. And we also have Mark Russell, Inclusion and Diversity Quality Manager at KPMG. So welcome very much to all of our panelists. Delighted that you were able to join the session today. And Holly, I'm going to begin with you if that's okay. I'm going to ask 3 questions in a group and then give you the opportunity to respond. So first of all, why did Korn Ferry UK and Ireland begin the disability confident journey? From a recruitment position, how do you ensure that Korn Ferry is working with its clients to enable them to attract the right candidates for work opportunities? And how do you engage with disabled talent? And then finally, Holly, what role do you think leaders have in driving this agenda forward within their industries? So over to you, Holly.
Thank you, Amanda, and great to be here today. So why did we start our journey? Korn Ferry recognised the importance of a truly diverse workforce. And I think the thing about disability confident is it's not a tick box exercise. It's an actionable statement about the steps that we're taking for our employees to feel included and empowered to contribute to our journey. We want to ensure that Korn Ferry is an attractive employer to all groups. That's part of our values, to ensure that we have a safe and right place for our employees to grow their careers, and recognising the innovation and the fresh thinking and that diversity of thought that comes from a truly diverse and inclusive workforce. I think the other part of that is it's an important opportunity to influence the clients that we work with on a regular basis on the disability inclusion agenda, and to help foster a more inclusive environment at the top of the UK and Ireland corporates. And being a talent consultancy and advisory, the majority of our team and our consultants are generally very empathetic to the diversity and broader inclusion agendas anyway in the course of their work with clients. But we're keen to demonstrate our own commitment to that, and to make sure that we're on that journey ourselves, and that we're held accountable for the measures that we suggest to our clients as well. So I think it's about taking initiative to make things better, leading by example, and perhaps just thinking beyond the moment in terms of, you know, what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, and continuing to move the dial forward. So I think that's really why we started the journey, and it's been incredibly well received internally. I think everybody's really embraced it and enjoyed being on that journey, and it's really opened our eyes to some simple steps and a lot of things that we were already doing actually, but bringing it all into focus. So the second question, how do we ensure that we're working with our clients to enable them to track the right candidates and to engage with disabled talent? Look, it's not an easy task always in terms of finding that truly diverse talent, and we're constantly working to ensure that our long lists and short lists are as diverse as possible, because that way we can directly influence the hiring of diverse talent. We encourage our consultants to have that dialogue with clients at every part of the search process, including having an inclusive and accessible recruitment process, something which, you know, they haven't always considered at the outset of a search or a project. And we do always try and constantly challenge mindsets and behaviours of our own teams and also our clients, recruiting partners. We encourage, you know, teams to do the right things, to have team discussions about the search strategy, our approach, making sure that we're tapping into as broad a talent pool as possible, using, you know, groups and forums such as this, through maintaining a strong network that is truly diverse, and encouraging people to come forward, as well as ongoing training and raising awareness of the opportunities that are available to people with disabilities as well. You know, there's a huge talent shortage, particularly in technology, and you know, it's in everyone's best interest to tap into this rich pool of talent. So I think it's, you know, it's about the training, the ongoing awareness, and making sure that we're proactively seeking out really diverse talent pools. And then your third question, what role do you think leaders have in driving the agenda forward? I think arguably that's the most important role. It's got to be leading by example, including, you know, diverse members in teams wherever possible, building teams for specific projects and enabling them to own those, ensuring that you know, teams are chosen from as wide a group as possible, promoting intercompany industry-wide solutions and discussions, you know, in forums such as this, which is brilliant to bring this to the fore. But I think the role modelling piece is what's absolutely essential. You know, using the platform to speak up, challenge the status quo, and actively encouraging others to do the same. That's very much where I see our role, showcasing what can be done, being very honest and open about our own journeys, and giving greater visibility to the issue, and then supporting others on their journey as well. You know, sharing the knowledge and the learnings. You know, it's about taking that first step, I think, and making the commitment to set a path to a more inclusive workplace. And you know, the more that we can encourage others to make that first step as well, is really where I see the role of the leaders. I hope that answers your questions.
It certainly does. Thank you so much, Holly. So much information there. So thank you. It's just really interesting to listen to your journey and to think, you know, that you're so engaged with all of this. So thank you so much. Really insightful. I'm going to move on then in that case to Shanna. And Shanna, again, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you 3 questions all in one go. And if you can respond to those, that would be so helpful. So first of all, Shanna, how did you find the disability confident journey, moving all the way through from level 1 to level 3 of the scheme? And then secondly, as a disability confident leader organisation, what role do you think Coca-Cola plays in promoting disability employment to other employers? And also, thirdly, what difference has the scheme actually made to your disabled employees?
Oh, thanks, Amanda. It's great to be here with all of you today. So I think to start with that journey, I'm going to start with who we are. So I imagine everybody who's listening in today probably knows our brand, Coca-Cola, but most people don't know who we are. We describe ourselves as the business behind the bottle. We do all the manufacturing, the sales, the distribution of Coca-Cola and hundreds of other brands and beverages to retailers, hotels, restaurants, cafes here in the UK, across Europe, and in other parts of the world. That means we have a hugely diverse workforce, but also very diverse workplaces. We have over 50 manufacturing sites. We've got people on the road delivering the products, people out calling on different types of customer environments. And we knew intuitively that we wanted to make a commitment around disability employment and disability awareness, but we didn't know how. And that, I think, is where Disability Confident really came in and appealed to us, partly as what Holly said. It wasn't just about making the commitment, it was about taking practical action. And yes, while we're a big organization and we have a lot of resources at our disposal, it was really for us figuring out what were the practical ways to get started and the steps that we could do. And Disability Confident, I think, really helped us with that. We've really benefited from the experience of the other members who have been able to share what they've done. We can learn from them. The Disability Confident Scheme is great about hosting so many webinars, providing other resources online for employers to access. We've really been able to use all of that to progress very quickly through the disability confident levels, and today find ourselves as a disability confident leader, but very humbly so. What I think, to speak to one of the next questions in terms of the difference it's made for us, but also our role in promoting it. I'd start first actually with the difference it's made to our employees. So we very quickly made disability inclusion part of our people strategy and made it one of the key pillars of that people strategy. That in turn led us to making sure that we had sponsorship of it at an executive level, but also meant that our employees very quickly started to form what we call catalyst groups. So people that felt really passionate of all abilities, felt passionate about this in the workplace and the impact our business could have, not just at CCEP, but also through the many thousands of businesses that we work with. And between that support at the top, but also the catalyst group across our organization, identifying where we weren't doing well, what we could do better, what steps we needed to take, and that we've also been able to take back to Disability Confident and find out then, as I said earlier, about from other businesses, how did you do this? So some of the things that has led to us doing is a full accessibility audit across our business and all of those different workplaces to figure out how we can improve that and make it more inclusive. It's also led us to develop accessible communication guidelines and practices, which we're in the process of rolling out across the business right now. It really start to see the change internally across our workplace. And what's been just fantastic to see, I think, is the impact that it's had on our culture. And that, I would say, goes hand in hand with the name Disability Confident. Our employees now are so much more confident to speak up and share their experiences, come forward with their suggestions and recommendations about what we can do to make CCEP more accessible and more inclusive. Which, that really then leads me to that final question about what's our role in promoting promoting disability awareness and inclusion in the workplace and employment, we recognize we have a very well-known brand. It does attract a lot of discussion and gives us a platform that maybe not all other businesses have. And what we've been starting to do now is really, how do we speak out much more externally about the benefits and the importance of disability awareness and inclusion in the workplace. We do that by getting involved in forums like this today, but also I mentioned earlier the hundreds of thousands of businesses that we work with. That gives us access to quite a few other networks. We have guiding principles with our suppliers. We're really able to make disability awareness an important part of that participation in those networks to reach other businesses with this. And I think while we still feel like we have a lot to do, we've also learned so much now over the past few years being part of Disability Confident that has given us the confidence to find our voice and speak out. And I hope through forums like today, we'll continue to learn from others as well too, so we can keep getting better.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Shanna. That was really, really helpful. Just brilliant, really, to see that you are engaging and working very closely with your disabled employees who are obviously forming part of your disability strategy. And I would urge any employer to listen to the talent and expertise of those disabled people that work within your organisations and learn from those experiences. So I think you made a really critical point there, Shanna. Thank you very much for that. And thank you also for your involvement in being a disability confident leader. It's just fantastic to have organisations such as Korn, Ferry and Coca-Cola Pacific involved with us. So thank you very much. And finally, Mark, I know you've joined, so I'm delighted to see you sat there. If I can move on to Mark, Mark from KPMG. As we know, Mark, KPMG is a really proactive, disability confident leader, extremely positive at driving forward this agenda. But as a disabled employee, what difference has this made to you is my first question. And then finally, I'm going to ask you also, why do you think employers should sign up to Disability Confident and start that journey?
Thanks, Amanda. And firstly, thank you for asking me to join today. And just for our any visually impaired attendees, I'm Mark Russell. I'm 38 years old, white visually impaired man, joining you from my spare room, recently painted yellow. So yeah, to answer those questions then, Amanda, firstly, as a disabled employee, currently now, I now sit in our central kind of diversity and inclusion team, but when we signed up to Disability Confident, back in November 2016, kind of when it has been initiated, I was just part of our disability employee network, which at KPMG we call Workability. So kind of my journey and my own disability confident journey kind of has kind of mirrored the Disability Confident program and its own journey, really. And it was certainly one of the catalysts for me actually moving from a completely different role into the diversity and inclusion space, which actually for me has been really important in terms of not just my retention in the workplace, which Amanda mentioned about earlier, which, you know, and I think that's an important aspect of Disability Confident. It's about retention, not just recruitment. But for me as well, it's been about my career progression. And as I guess I've actually understand and changed my own perception of my own disability, battled, I guess, with my own feelings of imposter syndrome and trying to understand what strengths I have and what value I bring to the workplace, and kind of really understood what and how I am doing that. You know, I've seen myself able to move into that diversity and inclusion space to pursue an actual career in that space, but also to flourish and progress in that space. So I think it is really important. I think one, from when I was just part of our disability network, to know that KPMG were supportive of a scheme like this and committed to employees. But I mean, there was already that employee network that was there helping to raise awareness. So there was already some good bits of practice that were going on. There were already some champions within the business, but not enough, and we needed to have more. So it was kind of a catalyst to, one, kind of help raise awareness, do joint events. I mean, we partnered with across the civil service to run joint events on Disability Confident, which was great from, again, my perspective of just helping to organise those and try and sort of raise that awareness internally at KPMG. But then again, what Holly and Shanna touched upon as well, learning from others and bringing that back into the business was really important. And again, all of this was actually, for me now looking back, was building my own understanding of that there was actually a kind of a D&I sector that was focusing on work on disability inclusion. And I was kind of always quite introverted, so I didn't necessarily want the attention always to be on me, but understanding the challenges and experiences of others and really trying to understand that and see how that related to what companies and organizations were doing in terms of inclusion and accessibility programs was really a great kind of grounding and learning for myself. And like I said, it was certainly the catalyst for me then wanting to move into a D&I role. And I'm lucky enough now to kind of actually, as part of my role, get to work on our kind of central sort of disability inclusion work and make sure that I'm joining the dots and keeping our leaders that are kind of working or advocating on this connected and updated, and ensuring our policies, processes are kind of, again, embed disability inclusion at the sort of very start of all of the processes and policies. So yeah, I kind of feel lucky that I've sort of started the journey, and it's kind of been the catalyst to my own disability confident journey, and really kind of understanding and building my own confidence and career journey. So that's certainly from an employee perspective, but then I guess also as over time I've also seen it from the employer perspective as well, and I'm lucky enough that I get to talk to lots of other organizations and just provide our sort of journey on disability confident as well, and the steps we've taken. So again, I'm always happy to do that. So if anyone would like to reach out, I'm always happy to have those discussions with other D&I practitioners out there. In terms of why should other employers sign up to Disability Confident? Well, I think it's a simple question, or a simple answer to this, and that's, I think, flipping it and say, why wouldn't you sign up? I was looking at this question earlier, and I just thought it's not actually, in its simplest form, it's not asking a lot. It's just making a commitment to say you're inclusive to disabled people and open to employing anyone with a disability or a long-term condition. Like, if employers ask themselves that question, I'm sure they'd all say, "Oh yeah, of course we're open to that." So for me, it's more like, why wouldn't you? It's quite an easy commitment to make, and then even as you move through the levels, whilst there is kind of a process to go through and a sort of a kind of a benchmark submission to complete, it's not a really arduous one. And having worked in diversity and inclusion now for nearly 5 years, having to complete other sort of benchmarks like the Workplace Equality Index that Stonewall have, or Social Mobility Employer Index, they're really robust benchmarks. And again, like the BDF's Disability Standard benchmark, they're really robust that measure kind of an organisational approach over 10 areas. The Disability Confident submission is not as robust, but still robust enough to make sure that you're making some commitments, you are doing kind of what you're saying you're going to do. But I would, encourage any employer that's kind of thinking about it to join the scheme. It's a great learning opportunity as well, a great opportunity to go out and listen to other organisations. And I think one of sometimes biggest barriers can be is just an organisation not quite knowing, not knowing what they don't know, and thinking, do we employ any disabled people at the moment? Not sure. We probably do, but not quite sure. But sometimes that first step is just trying to understand a bit more about who you are actually employing. It could be the first step to really understanding, okay, what can we do? What can we be doing around understanding what our own workforce looks like? How can we get people to share their own experiences? And in turn, that will mean that we're able to provide them with the support that they need to flourish and be confident in the workplace.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mark. And just to say, I am delivering a Lunch and Learn session with more information about disability confident and further guidance around the scheme later on today as part of the conference. So please watch out for that. But I couldn't have put it better, Mark. So thank you so much. And I think what you've also done is reminded me about the fantastic work we've done jointly around, sharing knowledge and information around disability with the civil service, the wider civil service across the countries, but also KPMG staff as well, and being able to share information around autism and neurodiversity, mental health in the workplace, and a whole raft of different practical subjects around things like accessibility, access to work, disability confident, and why employers should start that journey. So that kind of takes me to the very end of this session. I want to thank Holly, I want to thank Shanna and Mark for joining me on the panel. And finally, to anyone watching this today, please join the next session, the Lunch and Learn session. But also, please join the Disability Confident journey. Please sign up today via gov.uk. And I promise you'll have access to so much information, guidance, free advice and resources that's really going to help you to say yes to disabled talent. Thank you so much. And I'm going to hand back to Mark in the studio.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you so much. What a great session. I mean, I think the confident bit in there is such a key word. I was thinking, sometimes when we're working in AbilityNet, it feels like no one else is doing this stuff. Yeah. But, I'm confident now that there's a lot of people out there in big organisations really caring and trying to join the dots in their own organisations. Yeah. And I think Disability Confident is a very, very successful badge for in terms of organisations adopting it and seeing the value of it. Actually, it's hugely valuable as a network as well, and it connects people together. I think the other bit about the confident is that you can hear that in some of the things we're talking about, is people need to be confident about talking about disability. Yeah. Very often that's an initial barrier for anybody, irrespective of whether the employee is not very confident about asking for help, or not very confident about what's available, or the employer not very confident about what to offer and the language to use and the sensitivities and all the obvious and necessary concerns they may have. I think this cuts through, doesn't it? It really does brings those things to the surface. It gets organisations talking about change and the needs of people in their organisation. Yeah, and certainly, I mean, we're disability confident leaders. Mairead Crommerford has done a fantastic job getting us up and getting that status. But as Mark was saying there, why wouldn't you? Yeah. You're doing all this. Why wouldn't you go forward and have that badge and say to other people, and as you say, the networks are the important part, and then sharing that knowledge on, being able to be there for other people who are going to be struggling with the taboos and what do I say here and how does this bit fit together? And it's a fantastic scheme. Yeah, I think so. And it also reminded me when we're talking about commitments, a valuable 500 yesterday, that an organisation's made a commitment, actually it's got to start putting it into practice. And one of the elements of that is really then when you start running stuff and doing stuff, I'm just going to reflect on trying to run an accessible global conference. I mean, so we made a commitment to making it as accessible as we can. There's a few people on this call who are going to be reminding us there was a couple of things we didn't get right. And so you have to see it as a journey. I'm putting my hands up and saying it's a journey, but it's also part of that moving forward and listening and changing. Yeah. And the way that technology shifts means that there's more opportunities one day than there was the previous day. And I think it's a moving target, and you have to accept that that's the nature of the change that you have to see. Yeah, and being able to kind of take a step back and say, we are going to encourage the feedback. There are times when we get the feedback and it's perhaps a little bit kind of not what we want to hear, but you've got to take that on board and you've got to say, right, okay, well, this is a learning now. Yeah. We got it wrong. We're sorry about that bit, but now having got that, we can do something about it. And it's that
to and fro. It's that conversation to say that this is how we make it better, and this is how we make it better for everybody, because we can now hand that on to other people.
And I think it's not a blueprint, and organisations are complex beasts, the people coming and going in roles, all sorts of changes can happen. And so what I'm also thinking about is the workshops are running this afternoon start to get under the skin of some of those questions about running accessible meetings and being in an accessible and inclusive workplace. When we were talking to Amy earlier, we were talking about collaboration, and that's, I think, that's something that really pulls that question together. How can I be productive and part of a team and connect in your environment, with your role, with your networks, with your... It's going to be different for everybody. And the support that you need is going to come from lots of different places. And I think the gap we see between disabled people in the workplace and trying to close that gap, a lot of it is from the employer side, being more confident. And equally, as Holly pointed out, you need this talent. You need to have as wide a door and as many people coming in through that door as possible, because that's where the talent's going to come from that's going to change the way your business grows and improves. And having disabled people in your organisation is one of the key ways to change that knowledge and understanding, break down those barriers, overcome some of those taboos. Simply sitting next to somebody day in, day out, your perspective will change.
Yeah, and conversely, we've heard time and time again of these situations where you don't have that diversity, where, I mean, the classic examples being some of the tech companies that do have a largely male, largely white workforce, non-disabled, that will suddenly make these gaffes and these horrible things happen to them, this really poor publicity, because they don't have that diversity, because they haven't reached out, they haven't joined schemes, they haven't,
I mean, it sounds simple. It's not simple, and the reason that we're sort of pivoting really from yesterday, big picture, Caroline Casey, 500 CEOs making all that commitment, then into disability confident when the nuts and bolts start to come to the surface, and then hopefully into this afternoon for you. Join our workshops if you can, and see some of the practical stuff that needs to be shared. And I just remind you again, about some of the workshops later, where in the networking meetups later on, where it's a little bit more connecting up and sharing. There's one that we're running around the work we've done with the DCMS and the Digital Lifelines program, and there's another one about accessible mapping, which a special interest group being a good example of where people are beginning to share technical knowledge and skills. So all through today, there's a chance for you to connect in, find somebody who's talking about the sorts of things you're trying to grapple with in your role. So we really hope you'll look forward to this afternoon. Make sure you use the networking, make sure you join into the workshops, and we'll catch up with you again at the keynotes later on in the day. Thanks for joining us.